Good afternoon, it's Joe Mullings from 160 Studios in Delray Beach, and joining me today is Siddarth Satish from Gauss out in Silicon Valley. And are you in the office today? I think that desk looks familiar, or is that home?
Home
Oh, yeah.
office.
Yeah. Last time I saw you was about a year and change ago when we were going through that amazing technology that had taken just basic vision off of a phone and was able to predict and high level of accuracy blood loss in OR. So how are you, Sid?
Doing well as anyone can in this difficult time. We're excited and we're staying really busy with a couple of new projects. So, no, doing well. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing well. We're staying busy. The emerging tech community has not slowed down, as is the case with you and your team. And I wanted to bounce first into Gauss and exactly what it is that technology does, because I think the world needs to understand it more, although you've done a good job of spreading the word. But then I want to talk about this very interesting transition you've been in the middle of. But let's hold there and go back to Gauss, and let's talk about what the tech platform does.
Sure. So Gauss, founded the company about 9 years ago now, and we really came out of a series of chance occurrences in just my own training. When I was a grad student, I had the privilege of watching surgery and spending a lot of time in operating rooms. And I found that there were certain problems in medicine, challenges in medicine that were still not as guided by technologies that could. On one hand, you had a surgical robot. On the other hand, we were guesstimating whether or not the patient needed a transfusion in surgery. So my colleagues and I came up with this new platform, which we called Triton, to use the camera of a mobile device to quantify how much blood is actually being lost in the surgery as the sponges are taken out of the surgical field, as the canisters are suctioning blood. And by doing so in real time, you can then guide physicians on their decision making around whether or not a transfusion is needed, and if so, how much blood do you really transfuse. So we took this through the de novo pathway through the FDA. There was no technology like it. This is back in 2014. We were finally awarded a de novo clearance. And in the years following, we had several iterations and 510Ks along the way. Triton is now starting to be adopted as a standard of care in obstetric hemorrhage care, specifically labor and delivery, so C-sections, vaginal deliveries. It's used currently in just over 250,000 surgeries in the United States commercially. And we've been very fortunate, I think, through the pandemic to actually see our utilization rates go up and to the right. Because babies are still being born and maternal mortality is something we need to protect against, and so we're seeing some real value being driven to our customers through this time.
Yeah, I was blown away by the tech when I was out there. I think it was about a year and change ago when we were in your facility. Certainly a different time, a different place. And you mentioned you had started considering using a camera that is on a iPad or an iPhone. What was it, 9 years ago in grad school?
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And so back then it was crazy to think about a camera with intelligence, advisement in an OR, cameras outside of robots in an OR, artificial intelligence, and now everywhere you turn, it is insinuated and quickly becoming adoption and standard of care in nearly every environment as you see more and more of these organizations pop up.
Absolutely. I mean, when we founded the company, the iPad hadn't been released, and it was released shortly thereafter. So I think I was using an iPhone 3 to a 3GS, I want to say, to take these photos of the surgical workflow when we started. And here we are today on the iPhone 11 Pro Max. That's our current platform. Since I last saw you, we've actually had a very successful launch of the iPhone platform. So we, for the last few years have been on the iPad, much bigger sort of screen real estate. But for various reasons, we pivoted to the iPhone. because we realized, there's a lot you can do with that iPhone in surgery if you can pick it up and move it around and start scanning some other things. So that's been going very well.
Yeah, it's amazing to think that iPhones right out of my back pocket would be in surgical theater in today's day and age. So everything's becoming blurred. Now, the technology you have, there are some organizations that have come to the rescue and taken part in holding up this war on COVID. And I had noticed you and I caught up with each other just 2 weeks or so ago about the Cellex relationship and how you have taken this back-end engine that you've built and your team have built, and with Cellex have got a point of care. And if I'm not mistaken, was it at-home use potentially?
That's right. Yeah. So we are trying to really get COVID testing to the masses, so to speak, in really a distributed sense. So the relationship with Cellex is a really interesting one. We, at the start of the pandemic, started to work with a few research teams around the US on COVID testing. Just given the work we're doing with mobile apps, we had friends who pulled us into these collaborations and said, look, can the Gauss team help us create apps that can help do these large scale COVID studies? So it really started as a pro bono sort of research endeavor. We were happy to help. I think we had some capacity to quickly spin up a few apps. So it was through those research studies, we, at this point, we're collaborating with Stanford Medicine on two very large COVID studies. One is called the CATCH study, and it's basically an at-home PCR testing workflow. And the other study is called the CA-FACS study, California FACS. And we're working with a number of counties there to actually look at seroprevalence, which is the prevalence of antibodies, IgG antibodies specifically to coronavirus in the population. And these are all studies that are aimed at not only expanding access to testing, but more importantly, helping us at a population health level from a public health standpoint understand the spread of COVID-19 within our communities. It was through that relationship that I met James Lee. He's the founder and CEO of Cellex. And Cellex, notably, is the first company globally to actually obtain emergency use authorization from FDA for an antibody test. So back, I think, in late March, right as the pandemic was really starting to hit full swing in the US, they received the first EUA. And I think that was foundational. It paved the way for hundreds of different manufacturers to pursue that pathway. And when we spoke about where we were with our respective technologies and studies, Gauss had started developing some pretty interesting technology to actually interpret these rapid tests. We did so initially just to help with these studies. And James and I were talking one day and we said, wouldn't it be interesting if we could actually take antigen testing, not antibody testing, but antigen testing, and bring it into the home so that consumers like you and I can quickly test ourselves in 15 minutes and kind of have a piece of valuable information. And we sort of realized if we put our technologies together, we could really enable that. Just so happened Cellex was building an antigen test at the time. And so now we're, here we are.
So I'm a lay person. I'm watching this at home. How would that test declare itself without taking me into the X's and O's on this?
Yeah, so it's very simple. It's like a pregnancy test. The test uses a nasal swab that is self-collected by the home user. You dip the nasal swab in a tube of little solution to we call as eluting the sample, so get the sample out of the swab, and then you drop a few droplets of that onto the rapid test. It's got a little hole that you aim for. You put 4 drops, and in about 15 minutes. The assay develops and gives you either one line, which says that you're negative, it's a control line, or 2 lines, which says, okay, you're positive. Now, the trick here is those lines can be really faint. And it's all about those faint lines. And as you know, I like these problems where it's hard for the human eye to really know what's going on, but maybe a camera can help you bridge that gap diagnostically. And so what we're having the user do is you run this test, you take a scan with your phone, and we use algorithms to give you the results directly.
Wow. And so the nasal swab, self-administered, I have avoided the touching of the brain that I've seen with some of these. Is this just a basic somewhere in the nasal cavity, or is it deep brain stimulation, as I've seen, where that stick continues to go into the person's head and come out?
Right. So what you're referring to is the NP swab.
Yeah.
It's the thing looks very copacetic, but it's I've learned to come to dread those myself. So we call those the brain biopsy, where it's all the way back into your nasopharynx. And the reason they do that is so you get a good sample of the virus. Now, studies have come out over the past several months as the pandemic has raged on, showing that swabs taken closer to the anterior side of your nose are actually just as effective. There's a strong correlation, strong agreement. So what we're doing is sort of a deep anterior nares swab, or sort of like a mid-turbinate swab. It's about an inch into your nose. A consumer at home can easily self-collect. And what we've seen over the past several months is a number of companies come out with at-home collection kits, where a user can self-collect and then send it to a lab. So we're sort of adopting the same workflow there. We know it works. Mm-hmm. We know it's safe, effective. Now, what we are really doing to push the boundaries is to give you your results right there on site in 15 minutes.
Yeah. So will this test, this point of care, point of home consumer test, will this be conclusive, or will this simply raise a flag as to versus negative, positive? How about a negative, maybe positive? Where does this sit in that continuum?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So the way this test works is it's an extremely high specificity test. It's 100% specific. So if you test positive and you get 2 lines, you are highly likely infected with COVID-19, and you can take immediate steps, immediate caution, self-isolate, quarantine. We definitely encourage you to get a confirmatory test, because PCR is ultimately the gold standard. But this is a really good screening tool, right? You don't have to wait to get a test and get results back. This tells you immediately. Now, if you test negative, and this is true of most antigen tests, their sensitivity is not as high as PCR, right? So a good antigen test generally has around 90% sensitivity, and that's what we're seeing in our early data. Now, that means that for every 10 negatives that you get, 9 of them are truly negative. 1 of them may actually be a positive. And so, a negative result really has to be interpreted with caution. And, it doesn't mean you're not infected. It just means that you're likely not as infectious. It sort of means that your viral, load wasn't as high, but you cannot rule out infection, using a screening tool like this.
Sure. And as a parent, as a partner, as a business owner and a business partner, if I have somebody who's traveling somewhere and they're not able to, at this point, again, tolerance risk in play, I want to know you come home, you test, like, nah, I'm not getting a positive. At least I'm feeling okay, but I totally would want to know if it is a positive, right? So that's the way I think we're going to have to look at this is, don't look for the reasons not to move forward, but certainly look for the reason to accelerate you going out to get a confirmation test.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the responsible way to look at it. I'm often asked, hey, if I get a negative, does that mean I can go out and, move on with life? And the truth is, you have to pair this with other interventions and take sort of a public health, population health view of this. Yeah. You still need to wear a mask. You still need to wash your hands. You still need to follow social distancing when you can. And if you have the opportunity to get a confirmatory PCR test, because it is a very sensitive gold standard, then you absolutely should, try and get that. The problem with PCR is that while it's very accurate, it's the turnaround times and the processing time that's the issue. I personally, spent time at a drive-through and waited to get a PCR result. And it took about 7 days to get my result. And this was back before there was a surge. We know folks in New York who didn't receive their COVID test result for 10 days. And, you have a lot of folks on record saying that, PCR shouldn't even be reimbursed if the result is more than 48 hours delayed. So I think it's really key to sort of bridge the gap here. by saying, look, there's accurate and delayed, and then there's sort of rapid, pretty good, maybe not as accurate, but it's still very valuable from a public health perspective.
Yeah, I think you nail it. Triaging this is it shouldn't be all or nothing at this point, especially since we don't have our arms around this. So raising a flag is always a good thing, or giving some level of 90% confidence. Do you see the science progressing from your perspective? Do you see the science progressing with this point of care test, maybe with the CellX-Gauss relationship, ever being absolute 99%?
I think that's a worthwhile goal. I think it's, there's a lot of elements here in the test taking process. There's the efficacy of the nasal swab itself. How do you get really good efficacy, or really good sample if you're not going all the way back, to the old brain biopsy? And so I think you sort of lose little bits of accuracy along the way as you try to achieve accessibility. So it's always a trade-off. And some say, look, you can't have low cost, rapid, and accurate all at the same time. And I think what we're all trying to do, and I think you're seeing a lot of folks out there, is to optimize for those three variables, to try and make this as accurate and rapid, but also low cost at the same time.
Yeah, what I like about this, though, is we look at the challenge here in this country, 330 million people that would need to be tested on a regular basis as we work through this, whether it's a herd immunity or something like that. It's a distribution issue too, right? So as you look at this, and I'm fascinated by this too, because you're using a consumer product right now, using the Apple platform in an OR. It's totally acceptable. The FDA has said it's good. So that to me is a quantum leap into consumer products, consumer mindset, quickly merging into the classic provincial medtech mindset. And I think of something like this CellX-Gauss relationship as being the biggest challenge is distribution. How do I get all of these sort of at-home kits that deliver the sample? And this leads me immediately to an Amazon partnership with a CellX-Gauss, because it's a trusted brand. They're known for distribution and supply chain. They can lock down that sort of patient path. Would you take this to a medtech company? Would you take this to a biotech company? Or would you take this to a consumer distribution supply chain, world beater like an Amazon?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. This is all about distribution. Until we receive the EUA, it's all about accuracy and data collection. The minute we do, this is all about execution, scale up, and distribution. A couple, parameters there. So our partners and we have the collective ability to, I think, manufacture up to 40 million tests per month if we were to scale into our existing supply chain infrastructure that's built for this rapid test. But that, I'll start by saying, just only scrapes the surface of what we need from a capacity standpoint. So there's no doubt there's going to have to be more funding and more players in the market besides us that, along with us, can fulfill truly the need. Some say that the country needs between 6 and 20 million tests per day for us to really get back to a point where we're collectively reducing risk because enough tests are being taken and sort of returning to normalcy while we wait for a vaccine to come out that's truly safe, effective, and truly accessible for everybody.
Yeah.
I think that distribution is key. Having a large and a number of these partners that sort of access the consumer and can help the consumer access testing, I think that's critical. Now, a couple other points here. The first really interesting element with what we're doing here is that we took this idea of laboratory grade accuracy, and a lot of these antigen tests on the market today, they have machines that actually interpret the tests. And so the idea here was to use your mobile phone as the bridge to help sort of the entire population access testing at the same accuracy level as a laboratory machine would for these rapid antigen tests. So we're already doing sort of distributed medicine by leveraging your smartphone in your pocket as a medical analyzer. But to actually get the physical assets out to consumers is absolutely going to take a series of channel partners. We've been very fortunate I think we've just been overwhelmed by the response since we even launched news of our partnership a couple of weeks ago. You name it, we're talking to airlines, we're talking to retailers, we're talking to channel partners, even folks who are in the at-home testing business that are looking to diversify their offerings and bring sort of rapid testing to the masses. So I think it's going to be a collective effort. No doubt, larger sort of players in the space can really help make a dent in that distribution challenge because they have the pipes laid.
Yeah, and that's it right there, right? So you've got the distribution, you've got the trust. Trust is going to be really important in the eye of the consumer here as well. Then you've got the data analytics back end. And then something else that I've not heard enough of is contact tracing. I think there's a relationship on the data between testing in certain, let's call it area codes, zip codes, contact tracing, and then results, and then maybe being able, just like Google does with the flu, we could probably predict with a level of confidence on where we might have the next breakout if you were to triangulate all that data.
Yeah, that's a really interesting area. There's companies I think that companies like Kinsa that have actually done a really nice job of this, with the smart thermometers and actually pushing this data, to the cloud, so you can sort of see a live map of fevers in the U.S. And that, to me, that was one of the coolest things I saw around the data here. I think there's sites like RT Live that was put out a few months ago where you can actually track the real time, R naught value for any specific segment of the population, any geography. So I think these back end tools are going to be absolutely critical. It's what do you do with the data on a public health level? One of our collaborations with Stanford Medicine is actually really interesting here. So this is the Vera platform. It's run by Pat Arensdorf, and it's a collaboration between Stanford Medicine and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and the BioHub. And they're developing what I think is a really cool at-home testing platform. We were fortunate to be a small part of it with our at-home testing workflow under that collaboration. But in effect, what this study is doing is they're going to scale up to tens of thousands, hopefully hundreds of thousands of people in the community for at-home testing with a 24-hour turnaround. One of the key outputs of that is a live map. So you can sort of look at in these different parts of the state or the county or even a city where the neighborhoods where we may be seeing flare-ups.
Yeah.
So I think we go back and think national from a rapid test perspective. That's absolutely, I think, where we want to go with this. One of the recent partnerships that we've inked is with prior partners of ours. It's a company called Redox that you might have heard of. They're the leading healthcare integration engine that a lot of hospitals and labs and app companies use to kind of make sure these systems are talking to each other. We've been using Redox for many years to make sure that our bleeding data from surgery can get into the EMR. And it was a no-brainer for us to work with Luke and Nico and the team to essentially take our app for COVID testing, to integrate the data directly to the departments of public health. So when patients test positive, you can sort of have this data feed that can be used to enable contact tracing.
Yeah, and all this is so important, Sid, as we look at a world moving forward. I think finally everybody's got their attention, realizing that pandemics can and will continue to happen. So if we don't have an infrastructure in place that allow at least a flag to be raised, the use of contact tracing, a point of care device in every home, potentially that once we have a flare up, before you walk out of the house, when you walk back into the house, whatever that cadence is, you take the test, the data gets aggregated, and we can stay ahead of it, because we do realize now that staying ahead of this before it hits critical mass is just so important for managing these pandemics and on a worldwide basis. So it's fascinating what you're doing there. Well, my friend, you always blow my mind with your genius and your ability to dumb it down for somebody like me. Celex and Gauss and yourself and the team and the channel partners, who should they reach out to if there's somebody watching this, and I'm sure there will be, in order to lean in and see if they can be an asset to the help?
Yeah, no, please reach out to us at partners@gauss.com if you'd like to talk further with our team. Or feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, I'll put Sid's home number on the screen at the end of this. No worries about that. Listen, my friend, stay safe. Thank you so much again for the great technology you're bringing to the healthcare world and the noble fight going on.
No, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to speak with you, and thank you for the work you guys are doing.
You got it, Sid. Be well. This is Joe Mullings from 160 Studios in Delray Beach. Be well.